welcome. I can see your names, and I'm just taking a moment to look around, and if you feel like turning your camera on, that would be welcome. Of course, it's not required. Definitely have a sense of your presence. So my name is Sarah Jane Shangraw, and thank you for the heart. I'm a senior facilitator in mindfulness for Studio B. Welcome, and I would like to introduce Ned Buskirk, with whom I'll be having a conversation today. And a little bit of introduction. Ned is the founder and CEO of You're Going to Die, sometimes abbreviated as YG2, the numeral D. And it's a nonprofit bringing diverse communities creatively into the conversation of death and dying. Hi, Mary. Thanks for coming on. So I love this next part. And here's the language from You're Going to Die. It's inspiring life by unabashedly sourcing our shared mortality. So I'm not done letting folks know about you and your work, Ned, but I'd like to just pause for a moment on those words and let everyone sort of let them land in their body. Inspiring life by unabashedly sourcing our shared mortality. So
it's nice to have it read back to me.
Yeah.
I mean, so many years of kind of like honing the language and figuring out what it really is doing this, and what like the heart of You're Going to Die is, and where I show up. And so, yeah, it was nice to kind of close my eyes a little bit and just hear you say those words. It's not often I get a chance to kind of accept that invitation myself in that way.
Yeah.
So thanks for having me, Sarah Jane.
Yeah, we're so glad you're here. I want to give folks a general idea of the range, the scope and depth of the work that You're Going to Die does. So I'll name a few programs here.
Okay.
You're Going to Die has a hospice program, sending musicians to patients' bedsides. Monthly sellout live events and workshops facilitating creatively conscious mortality space for community. Now, they're one of those really dense phrases that
I love long
so beautifully
sentences.
crafted. A lot there.
Greatly influenced by my master's in English literature. Maybe
there
not
you go.
so.
It's shining through.
Yeah.
Shining through. Yeah. Creatively conscious mortality space for community. And enlivening open mics for men inside the prison system. Cancer patient workshops at UCSF for healing through creative writing. A free creatively conscious mortality podcast. And an organizational branch offering safe space for Black and Indigenous community, reparation funded by non-Black, non-Indigenous contributions. So thank you, Ned, for letting me get all of that out as well.
And we're out of time, everybody. Thank you so much for joining.
But your work is really broad, and I know that you started in your own apartment offering an event where people could come together and artistically express or process maybe their relationship to death. And I'm wondering about those first few days and what prompted you to open up your home like that, and what inside you was really compelling you to, I'm sure that was no small feat, right? Gathering everybody together and seeing what would emerge. What was going on for you then? Was this 2009, by the way? I think.
Yeah, okay. 2009. We talked a little bit about that. Hi, everybody. Super grateful to be here. So glad to see all of you, or read your names and sense your little presence behind your Zoom rectangles. I just was saying to Sarah Jane And the team, just how grateful I am to get a chance to talk about these things. I feel emotional just before I even start sharing, just for the opportunity to be here with all of you. So thank you. Yeah, we talked a little bit about this earlier in the week, Sarah Jane. So I know you know this, but just to kind of like revisit it, I'd like to think that back when I did the first event that would lead to You're Going to Die, I knew what the hell I was doing. But like maybe so often throughout the last 10 years, sometimes it's just paying attention and doing the next needed obvious thing, not knowing where it will go or what it's supposed to look like exactly. I feel like sometimes I think about it as like getting the skeleton set up, and then later you'll see like the meat and the bone, like the heartbeat and the flesh and the blood and all that over the bones. But really in the beginning, I was doing a master's out at San Francisco State, and a few different influences led to me wanting to create a community connecting event out in the city of San Francisco for the people in my program and the students and teachers to connect to people outside of the school. And that's really where the open mic started. And I think what's like, oh, well, that's what it was back then. It wasn't even called You're Going to Die. It's worth saying so. But I think there was a heart of something back then happening that matters still and still runs through the kind of spaces we facilitate, really everything that you listed in your introduction. And that's just this creative container for witnessing each other and sharing the things, whether they are poems or songs or written stories, or if they're just spontaneous moments where someone just feels compelled to like get up in front of everyone and say the thing they didn't know they needed to say. There are these parts of who we are we're carrying around all the time, and maybe don't have enough chance to be with community and say them out loud or share them with others. And so You're Going to Die, I think, is really built out of that kind of moment over and over again.
I think you're a space maker who employs as your main tool listening. And I love how you told me the other day too, how really things just developed based on what the ask was, who was there and what they needed.
Right. Yeah. We have this like moment that I don't know when I start the open mic in 2009 that I'd be here talking with you, or the many other things that have unfolded since, but there's something that happens in the saying yes to the thing. Just like saying yes to this, there's not like something to get to other than here. I'm really hope that I'm not. And I don't think my intention of being here is beyond like just us all being together and being raw and hearing each other and listening and seeing what gets created together. And that first open mic that's all that was happening. I didn't know that it was end up being a series. I didn't know that it would be very obviously needed a space outside of my apartment, like an official venue to start doing it every month. Like I didn't know any of that. And it's like every time I've shown up to these things over the years, the next thing gets asked of me, I feel, and of our organization and the people that are now a part of it over all these years. And it's both like not a 5-year to 10-year plan. I'm not like great at that kind of living, and maybe I should get better at it for, I don't know, the sake of who knows what list of things. But also there's a trust in this unfolding, that the repeated consistent yes and willingness to trust our compulsions and the places where we can show up is in itself enough, and it is in itself an answer, and it very likely because of that will show you what's next eventually.
It's so beautiful. Yeah, you've used the words uncertainty and I don't know and didn't know, and all of these indications that you began this with a big dose of trust, of course, right? Because when we're willing to be with that uncertainty, that's what it takes. So
yeah, I mean, I know that there's probably trust in there somewhere, but I almost feel like that gives me too much credit.
yeah.
It does feel like a little bit of well, I don't know what else to do, but the thing
Yeah.
that's getting
Yeah.
asked of me. And I think about that more than ever about all of this. I don't know what else to do but accept your invitation to show up here now. I don't know what else to do but to go into prison for the first time when I'm asked. And the reason why hearing you say that I had this trust in things, it's because I don't always, and so it feels like a lot to accept that that trust, that's something I've had all along, because it's so often not that. It's so often, as far back as maybe real important to mention, my mother's death in 2003, which really runs through so much of what I do. And the death of my mother-in-law in 2012, just like those things, there's not a trust in my mom's death and my mother-in-law's death. Maybe not completely. There's just moments, I guess, where you let go and do trust, but then there's also so much that like you let happen to you and let occur and let yourself go into, so that maybe eventually you might be able to trust more. I don't know. I guess I'm still kind of figuring that out, but it does feel like in some ways much of "you're going to die" has happened to me. Like my mother's death, it's just happened to me.
Interesting. Well, I guess I want to go back further too, because I'm always interested in folks who are willing to make their life about death, in some ways. I find it curious, like, what was the first experience with death, going way back, like casting your mind back to, the era where we were really malleable and each of us were being conditioned as young things, right? And so, for example, I remember, because I had a grandmother who was one of 9, I went through a period of, feels like every few months, going to the same funeral home in my dad's hometown and getting really used to those rituals and sort of the understandings of death that were being imparted to me at that time and the attitudes toward death. And I haven't necessarily kept them with me. And in fact, I purposefully tried to look at them and shed them. So I'm just wondering, like, are there formative memories or experiences that you think were foundational to you doing this work?
Yeah, thanks. That's a good question. I don't know how many people here could share this experience, but I think I was protected a lot from death in my life. So while there was a lot of grandparents, that I lost in the early years of my life, is particularly my grandfather's death. I was either too young, or the things that were happening, I just wasn't given a real invitation to access and share, I guess, emotion around it. So it's like, the easy way to answer that is I think the earliest thing I can say that really connects to mortality and death in my life, the thing that maybe dragged me into it more than being led by an adult or someone else saying, "Hey, do you want to talk about this that happened?" Is that my mother had cancer, got diagnosed with cancer when I was 13. And so there's a way that, she lived for 13 more years after that, but it was such a presence, her hair loss and her weight loss and her bloating and, the visits to the doctor and time in the hospital and being a single mother, like that presence was a palpable one. And she didn't talk about it much. She didn't sit down with me and tell me what was going on and what it meant and maybe what it could mean, and ultimately did, which is just her death from that cancer. Even when I moved home with her at 26 or 24 or 5, a year I lived with her to help and be with her while she was dying, she didn't talk about it. And once she said, when she was her sickest, the reason I moved home, she was in her little bed, in her little room, and she said, "Am I going to die?" And it's so wild to have that kind of be the only words she very directly put to years of living with this thing and getting treatment. Um and so, despite not being invited to talk about it and share my feelings and process what was going on, it was a presence. And I remember vividly being in the hospital room with her, and when she got the earliest news of that breast cancer diagnosis. And so it wasn't led by an adult or someone to like bring me into it, but it was there. And so much now is connected to all those years, not just her death, but that like living with this thing and the empathic absorption of what she was going through and her emotions around it and her body, like physical experience. And so, that, to answer your question, that feels like the most present part of my childhood that like connects to my own mortality and really how I show up, especially in my cancer patient work at the hospital, but really everywhere I show up, it's like my mother and all of that story of her life is with me. It's here now. Yeah.
Yeah. And she is here now.
Mm-hmm.
Thanks for bringing her in.
Mm-hmm.
You
Thank
told me
you.
her name is Chris.
Yeah.
Right?
Thanks, Sarah
Chris.
Jane. Yeah,
Yeah.
that's right.
Yeah. Yeah. It makes me think of an experience I had where a dear friend with a terminal diagnosis, stopped in the middle of a conversation with me one day that was about something else entirely. We were taking a walk, and she said to me, I don't consider myself dying. And in that moment, I realized that we hadn't been talking, and it wasn't necessarily that she didn't want to talk about it, but maybe that she didn't know how, the way it came out.
Yeah, that's
Yeah,
good.
clear to
Thank
me.
you. Yeah, it's like, I do know she talked to my older sister maybe more than me, and that might just be just kind of the gender connection and her being older and my dad not really being around. But also, yeah, you're right. Like she wasn't raised that way. And we talk about this, and I know we kind of planned on maybe touching on this more, but it's that pendulum swing, that we talked about earlier in the week. The idea that maybe some of you listening can relate to, which is how many people I meet, especially in our grief workshops, who, when they're asked how they were taught to grieve, say they were taught not to grieve, that they were really shown. And it's sometimes said like, keep your tears, like no crying, I'll give you something to cry about. I mean, that's extreme, but like just this idea that like it's private, you need to process that somewhere else, there's no place for it here. And just knowing that my mom was comfortable that way, like that's how she just was used to being. And so I don't fault her for it, but I definitely feel like I'm in the world being more expressive, maybe sometimes too much about it, because like that's the pendulum, like here I am, the result of growing up with a mother who didn't really much at all, at least not with me,
Sure. Well, I guess I can go back to that story about, all of my great aunts and uncles dying over the course of a few years, just one after another, and say that, like when I went to the funeral home, which became so familiar to me, I was expected to be stoic. I mean, or that's what I learned, through
like
nonverbal instruction.
Yeah, like kind of put together, like, yeah.
Yeah. I even remember my father telling me, I have a sister who's 7 years younger, take her by the hand and show her how it's done and be with her through this. And I think he was instructing me to, take her by the hand and show her how to be quiet,
Yeah.
So that's that generation. And so we kind of laughed about how it would be great to talk about what was going on mid-century, right? Like, why is our
Mm.
society so messed up when it comes to relating to death? Which is why there's a whole milieu of work for us to do around swinging the pendulum back to
Yeah.
normalizing it. So what the heck?
Yeah.
It's
It's a big one. It's a big question.
it is a big question.
Well,
But
you
given
know,
that we all have death in common, I
I
mean,
know, right?
really?
But what's so wild and interesting to me, and like, I'm not a scholar. I don't do a lot of research on this. I read an awfully large amount of books, I guess, about death and dying. And so there's some like influence there about the history of our relationship with death. But you know, a lot of this is kind of theorizing and taking like tidbits from some of the reading and influences over the last decade or so doing this work. But it is this knowing that there's cultures, you know, and times that did this really well and made a lot of room for mortality and death and ceremony and grief. And so, you know, you think, what is going on, or what was going on maybe in this country? And, you know, I don't know, because there's always a risk. It's like, I don't want to blame a whole generation either. I know that there's people in my mom's generation that like did grieving fine and they do it
Yeah,
well, and they've
yeah.
taught us how. I mean, there's a lot of teachers that I really feel influenced by that are of my mother's generation. And so it is this idea, though, that there are influences. And I think about the wars we've lived through and the way we needed to, like, you know, pull up our bootstraps and get out there and fight these fights and really like be tough and win wars. And you know, I think the ways I really can connect it is to that kind of influence through my family. You know, my dad fought 2 tours in Vietnam, and the amount of loss, meaningless more than ever, maybe, at least in comparison to some of these early World War I and World War II, which really inspired my dad, I think, to go and, you know, imagine making a life of meaning, because he'd seen generations before him do that in war. And to go to Vietnam and fight 2 tours and lose that war, or whatever language you want to put on it, and lose countless community members, friends, dear friends, neighbors, and really not be able, when you return to the country, to be in a like, to be received with the kind of spaciousness, the grief that would come with all that, you know, requires. And so, you know, that's the kind of stuff I think about with that generation. It's like, without saying I know anything real definitively about the way history's worked and why you're going to die exist in relationship to that, I can say for sure there's a bit of that in my family, and I know it's connected to this greater thing that we've lived through globally, and especially our country's involvement in that. I just remember one dinner being maybe like 12 or 13. I haven't talked about this in a while, so I'll try not to totally burst into tears
No, you're
repeatedly
welcome
throughout the
to
whole. Okay,
here.
I just want to at least make sure I'm speaking clear enough to all these things. But I do have a lot. I feel a lot of emotion around this moment. But I feel like I wanted to know about that influence and that loss with my dad. And I remember one dinner asking him, almost maybe naively, but just really like, inquiring after Vietnam and what that was like for him, and the rage that emerged for him, which I know now is deep, deep unprocessed grief,
Yeah.
and heartbreak and trauma, in the most devastating ways. He just unleashed in that moment at that dinner table, as if I was to blame, you know, as if I crossed a line, or But I remember him very specifically saying, you want to know what happened? You want to know what happened? And describing in detail a neighbor's friend of his brother, younger brother, who used to run around after him when he was growing up, who went to war. And I remember him describing this boy as like always wiping the snot off his nose, you know, because he just had a runny nose constantly. And you know, keep in mind, he's not just calmly talking to me about this. It's like it's like he's yelling it as if like it's a threat. But he told me that boy, you know, lost his arms in Vietnam, and just the connection between this like little boy he knew who had this runny nose and would wipe it on his sleeve, and then the devastating loss that Vietnam imposed on that person in his life, and him expressing that, but in rage. You know, I'll never forget that. And I, you know, until I was older and we could have maybe calmer conversations about what that time was like, that stuck with me. And it really does represent this way, at least in my family, these things weren't getting processed, you know, especially we think about like the veterans as a whole conversation of people who need room for dealing with the PTSD and the impact of the loss and the grief and relationship with like them and their country. And so, you know, it's a real presence.
Wow.
You know,
Absolutely. Thanks for bringing that in. I hadn't even thought about the impact on our parents and our generation of that particular war. But, you know, the moment you talked about your dad's outburst with you, it reminded me of how much hiding there was among my friends' dads. Not allowed in the house if their dad was there. Dad was in the bedroom, don't make noise. These were all vets of that war. And it occurs to me that we were busy pushing away the very real fact of trauma and the very real fact of death and grief. And that's happened in so many other areas of our society. I think about the medicalization of death. That's a pushing out of the home of the end of life, right? There's so much pushing away that we do. So big gratitude for you for making a big part of your work about how to come together and bring it into the room. And particularly, I know I mentioned this to you the other day, but knowing who's in the room, I want to say this out loud. Some of them are planning to come to a death cafe that I'm running next week. And I just want to point out, I'm really feeling into the beauty of your work, because whereas with a death cafe, we invite death into the room and we turn it over in our minds and we have a conversation about it. Your work is asking people to process it, often in an embodied way. And that's really how we process trauma and grief in the body. So I'm thinking about, I got to go on your website and see some of the live shows that you've recorded. The musicians, it seems like an awful lot who are your friends, you know, music and rhythm and singing along and dancing and moving the body and spoken word, the percussiveness of poetry, or the fluidity of it. All of that is asking us to live through, or let this content live through us, live through this body. And so a big thank you for that work. I think it's really important. And how beautiful that you're bringing it right into prisons, right into cancer wards, places where there's probably a sense of urgency around processing trauma and getting well, and being okay with impermanence and death.
Thank you. Yeah. You know, when we talked earlier this week, and now I'm just feeling really grateful for your reflections, because you helped clarify things for me, really, that I haven't been able to put into words, maybe better than you have been putting things into words. this idea of kind of embodied, like being in our bodies, like being present, processing what is here. There's a way I feel like after my mom died, I got invited in a bereavement group for the loss of a parent. The therapist who ran that space could definitively be the first person that ever was like, whoa, like you just said a lot, like notice your breathing, like check in with your body. Let's just like be quiet for a second. And I mean, that was like so wild for me at 26, 27 years old to have someone be like, hey, I heard you. And like, let's slow down and just be with what is going on in you and for you now that you shared all that. And I've talked about this idea of like so much of the open mic spaces and the workshops being this kind of head heart connection. We're putting a bunch of words to a ton of emotion and trauma and heartbreak and joy, lots of emotions. And I feel this way. I don't think of myself as someone, I know for sure I haven't done schooling around like body and meditation and somatics, and while again I've dabbled and been influenced certainly by some work in the world and people in the world who are experts at that. I'm not one to really easily lean into creating moments of like, close your eyes and, I'm going to do a visualization for you, or we're going to do a meditation on grief. Like I keep trying to find moments where those feel appropriate and I feel compelled to and comfortable with really holding that kind of space. But what you're reminding me is that the music, especially, but and yes, some of the reading, but the music especially, that has been a part of You're Going to Die since the beginning and runs through so much of what we do, is that chance. It's a chance to slow down and receive, be held by the music. It's almost like without even me knowing it, that's what I need when I put music on. That, and I mean certain kinds of music, I think you had joked when we talked this week about like wanting to watch really sad, intense movies because like that's the stuff, that's where it's at. And people joke a lot, like I love the ballads, I love, I have this long playlist of music that's called Sad Songs for Christmas. It's the only kind of music I really want to listen to during the holidays. But like I need that kind of moment, and the friends that are musicians often give me that moment. That's who I'm drawn towards, and they're really who do make up the organization, because I think now I can really articulate it with your help. It is that, it's that chance to be like, let's be here, in the body, in what everything that's coming up and all the feelings, and have that be held and make a lot of room for it. And the musician as a expert in taking the trauma and all the emotion and all the energy and like putting it into something that can like surround us and hold us and bathe us, all the things.
Oh, nice words.
Mm.
Bathe us.
Mm-hmm.
I want to mention that there's someone in the room who gave us a comment. Jess says, it's so nice to hear you both voice the power of art and music. Thank you. And I know Jess. Jess is a musician who
Thanks,
is also a
Jess.
mindfulness teacher and brings them together. So I had been really curious how this would land with her. And I hope later on when we open things up that we can hear from her. Yeah. And I'm wondering now if it's okay with you if we do take a pause. In my body, since you mentioned the episode with your dad, I'm feeling a charge. I'm feeling a buzz.
Yeah, me too.
I'm feeling like tension in my jaw. Yeah, which is it's all okay. It's all okay. And knowing that that might be the case for others, or who knows what's present, we could all take a pause together, and I can hold that space for us for a few moments here. And
Thanks,
so,
Sarah Jane.
yeah, just an invitation to everyone here. If you're so inclined, just feel your body in the chair or on the cushion you're on, and you might close your eyes fully or partially, or choose to look at something in the room that's really meaningful. And yeah, maybe just get a little curious about the breath. And maybe let this attention that you're giving to yourself, let it be a kind attention. And if there's not much present, if you're having a mild experience, that's fine. And if there's a lot present, that's fine too. It's all welcome. All welcome. Yeah. And if you closed your eyes or gazed away, you might come back. And I guess I just want to interject how important it is for us to take care of ourselves when we're dealing with a topic that many of us were trained or conditioned as young people to set aside, close the door on. And so that self-care becomes community care in the sense that we have to take care of ourselves, each of us, as we're relating, so we can really be present with each other. And I feel like I've been able to be present with you, and I just needed to pause. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks for that. I needed it too.
Yeah. Well, I feel like it's such a great opportunity to be here with you. I think of you almost as a philosopher of death, because you've spent so much time thinking about it, being near it, and creating ways for others to bring it in. So I guess I'm wondering, when you think about your own death, what do you think about? What are there hopes, or are you wondering something?
I think the first thing that comes up to me is that my dying self is such a dear friend to me, and the regularity with which he arrives here is so reliable, and the effect that eventuality has on me is medicinal and offers me so many chances to show up and get present. I know how death goes intimately because of my mom and my mother-in-law, but also because of the work, especially the hospice work that I've done since in these years. And being the kind of person who doesn't do too well with 5 or 10-year plans, I don't have much hope for that dying. There's all the things I could list, that I think we all relate to, but I almost feel like they're beside the point, in that knowing that death happens to us, maybe then I could say I have trust in how that will unfold and who will be there, how it will go. I guess I have hope that the people who my death happens to, I hope there's a way that it leaves them making a life they feel very fully wholly in, and that my life and death inspires them. I especially think right now, and have lately, of like imagining my kids next to me, assuming I'm not struck by a bus or something else really sudden and intense. But if there is a moment where someone could draw up alongside me, you know, I think about my kids, and I know how hard it will be and heartbreaking, but I have hope that they'll make meaning like I have with my mother's death. And I think that really is where our work is. You know, I don't think everything happens for a reason. I think we make meaning out of things. That's our work here. And there are limits to that. But I really believe that my mother's death and life, so too, has inspired my aliveness, and certainly very obviously laid out a path for how I am in the world that directly connects to who she was, how she raised me, and how she died.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
That's really beautiful. Thank you for that. And
thanks for asking.
yeah, your dear dying self. It's something I had never thought of before when I think forward to my death, but also having had that experience you've had, I'm sure we all share it, where the death of someone close illuminates the preciousness of this life, which you were speaking to so beautifully. You know, and I know there are a lot of people here in this room who absolutely count on contemplating death as a way to bring joy to life, as a way to remind us of the poignancy of the fact that our life is rare and unique, and it's happening now, and we don't know for how much longer, because the bus, as you say, could be waiting for me when I step out for a coffee after this. You know,
let's hope not. You know, I tell
well,
the kids, when the kid, you know, it's like being honest with your kids. They're like, am I going to die? It's like, well, we're not planning on that happening anytime soon, you know, and
yes.
this like somehow phrasing it as a, you know, there's no plan for that. You know, we hope to live long lives, but yeah, the bus could be outside.
Yeah, in your conversations with kids, absolutely. But I know there's more than one person in this room who, along with me, takes vows every morning about impermanence. And we do name that our death is certain, the exact time is unknown, and knowing this, what's most important. So we're just trying to do in a verbal way what you were describing so beautifully, which is letting death inform life. And there's something, I'm kind of going somewhere with this because I've been dying to ask you too.
You know what, Sarah Jane, I can't hear you, but maybe other people can. It might be me.
You may have lost. Can you guys hear me now?
I can hear you now.
Okay. It may be that my mic lost battery. Thank you. You did. That's exactly what happened.
I was like, wow, she's really thinking this question through. And then I looked up and saw your I have a question I'm dying to ask you, and I'm just going to sit quietly until I figure out how to say it. But yes, okay, I can hear you now.
Yeah, so the preamble is that I listened to a radio show about a year ago about the company or companies in Silicon Valley who are interested in creating a way to prolong life indefinitely. And I was horrified by the prospect, because I bring death close purposefully to help me feel joy in life and urgency and preciousness and poignancy. So I have this question for you. If a drug were created to provide immortality, would you take it?
Oh man, I think it would be a bad business decision, first of all, to run a nonprofit called You're Going to Die and be like, but I did take that medicine that they released recently. But no, in all, I know that's for sure true. But I think I would like to think not, you know, I would like to think I would be, I understand someone will, you know, I mean, like would, and really actually there's part of me that knows in the hundreds of thousands of years, as long as hopefully we don't completely annihilate ourselves, there's possibility of technology greatly increasing life, you know, without getting too much into all that, you know, let's just say, okay, this is a thing that can happen. And people will, okay, take the pill if they could. But I would like to think I wouldn't. And I'm reminded of this, such a strange reference. I'm thinking it's a Netflix series. And this one particular episode of this series is about, it's animated, and there's this story of this time where people live forever. And if maybe some of you have seen this episode, you could tell us what it is, because I can't remember the name of it. But the story is that there's this cop that it's his job to stop new life, like children, babies, from existing, because there's a law that you can't have new life, because we are all going to live forever. We can't have any more people being born. But the story, and I'm sorry if this is you don't know what it's called yet, so it's okay. So it's not a spoiler. You don't even know what I'm talking about. But the idea is at the end of this story, this person who's in charge of doing that makes a choice that leads to his death. And the idea in that moment is that he's alive for the first time, like fully, because he's dying. And so in that, I feel is a truth that maybe they're getting at, but that I like to think is true, which is that my aliveness here depends on the eventuality of my dying self. And I think a great question to follow up with that dear friend. I don't want my dying self to die with a pill of immortality. So I'm pretty sure I wouldn't take it.
Love it. Thank you. I was going to open things up and invite, and I am doing so, and invite others to put into chat whether they would take this pill or not. And then invite anyone who wants to talk about why they're yes or why they're no. No, Mary's got a no right away. I was worried that because of your beautiful answer that no one would be willing, but let's see what happens. So folks, and while you're contemplating this question, I just want to say that this question actually comes from, which you probably know, Ned, it's the death deck.
Yes, good people,
Death deck,
good product, good game.
A deck of cards with thought-provoking questions about mortality. So
I got mine right here.
Love it. Yeah, no, a bunch of no's from this group. And yeah, just wondering.
Jake, I just want to say, I'm not, just to avoid spoilers, Jake, I knew I just could tell you probably would know the show I was talking about. I'll just say maybe that's the show, to avoid spoilers. Yeah, I see the no's. Yeah.
If any of these friends want to come on and expand on their no. I'm just giving a beat here in case. Yeah. Oh, thank you, friends. Oh. With a cap of some sort, maybe. So Jake, you're interested in elongating. Oh, here we go. Okay, so whoever's on with the Studio B moniker, it might be Paula. When I was a child, I always assumed that everyone would want to live forever, but there's a passage in the Jewish Yom Kippur liturgy that reminds us that if we never died, what would happen to our children? Pondering that, I changed my answer to no. Thanks, Paula. Yeah.
This is Charlotte. I'd like to answer too.
Hi, Charlotte.
Hi. I want to say yes, and I want to go to a remote island and finally have that peace and sanctuary that I've been looking for. But then I think about the impact and the resources, and I like that we're allotted only a certain time that we can use the resources and create waste and then have that be done. It would feel selfish to have extra waste generated and extra resources used.
Yeah, that's good.
Yeah.
Thanks, Charlotte.
Amanda says something similar. Yeah. In the chat.
That idea that two connects to that for me, listening to you, Charlotte, is this like that dying creates life, that's like our sacrifice here is to live and then give ourselves back to this great thing.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I think if other people hadn't died before us, what would the world be that we were living in? If everyone had chosen to take the pill,
Right.
it would be quite a mess here.
Yeah, good point. Jen has her hand raised. And so, hi, Jen.
Sorry, there might be some background noise with my dogs, but Ned, thank you so much, Sarah Jane. This is such a beautiful conversation. I've been soaking it in. I think my answer is no. And for me, it really steeps in faith. And that faith is really complex. So I don't want to really get into that. But just, this deep knowing that it doesn't end here. And I wouldn't want to prevent my soul or essence or whatever it is that moves on. I wouldn't want to prevent that experience from happening.
Yeah. Thanks, Jennifer.
Thank you.
Thanks, Jen. I love that bow to the mystery. Yeah. Let me see what's next. Sure. I get that too. Amanda wrote, I think it would be incredibly arrogant to do so. I mean, I wouldn't want to put up with myself that long.
Oh my gosh. I really love that, Amanda. All these, and it's like a good amount of reasons not to, there is this idea that like, how tired of things would we get if it wasn't ever going to end. One of my favorite quotes, it's a Franz Kafka quote, is the meaning of life is that it ends.
Yeah. As meditators, we get to experience this in the matter of a moment. It doesn't take a lifetime because we won't take an inhale if we haven't exhaled. And I was putting a plug for practice in. People have heard me say this before. As practitioners, we can do a lot of self-regulation and help ourselves out when we're feeling agitated, or calm ourselves down when there's a lot of stimulation in the system, and really take care of ourselves. But the practice was developed 2,500 years or so ago and codified about 2,100 years ago to help us have the insight that everything is impermanent. And so we sit on the cushion, and what we're doing is we're observing breath coming and going, thoughts arising and passing away, emotions being constructed and then falling apart over and over in each moment. And it can have a steadying effect, I think, especially when we're going to be bringing death close in our lives, for the benefits of living joyfully and with meaning. Can be really helpful to experience that in a microcosmic way through practice. We have another comment, Jen. Oh, she's referencing our teacher. Something Sarah Powers said really resonated with me. When she sits with someone that is dying, she asks them, how are you preparing for this next great adventure? Yeah.
I really so appreciate your work and what Studio B is up to. And I do think, because personally, my exploration of meditation and body work and kind of like being, and where it intersects with our fragility and our temporal bodies, this option to, when you sit and in a way that I experience when I meditate, to give yourself your aliveness now. And I love the accent of where the impermanence, the room for that helps accent that moment too. But the idea, these cancer patients remind me of, we in our daily life just get carried away into the what's next, and the limitlessness of our existence, seemingly, like death is not present for so many of us often, but cancer patients really like live the edge and live the, like, should I buy a couch? Like, will I be alive to enjoy it? Should I go on that trip? Just that being faced with that. And it's like, well, that doesn't come with cancer. It's like cancer, just these things, even loss and grief, it reveals that. It reveals this thing that's so hidden and behind the veil. And really feeling lately with my sitting, maybe no surprise that I'm feeling like more committed and consistent with my meditation than usual. It may be like a unconscious Studio B influence, but it's really lately giving me that reminder, the gratitude for the being here now and the infinity of this moment, that it's not dependent on what's next. It's not dependent on a pill that would give you hundreds and hundreds and thousands of years of life. Like, that is no guarantee for aliveness. It's that arrow always back to here, and death points here. These things, grief, loss, impermanence, points right here.
Absolutely. That's really beautiful. Thanks, Ned.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah. Shay Jones is commenting, this is such an interesting and impactful conversation. I really appreciated when Ned mentioned that not everything happens for a reason, but rather that we are always trying to find meaning in the events we experience. Thank you both for being so open and real with us. Yeah, we're meaning makers. Yeah.
Thanks, Shay.
Yeah. Beautiful. Thanks, Shay. We have just a couple of minutes left, and I'm wondering, I'm going to make a really bad pun, if you have any parting words.
It's great. You snuck a couple in. Do you want to know if I have parting words? You know what? I think just gratitude. I just want to express my gratitude. Started with that, and just to end with that, just for the chance to be in this kind of conversation with emotionally, vulnerably. It feels like both, and I really accept the acknowledgement for my work and the years of showing up like this. So it's a real meaningful moment to have anyone say it matters enough somehow that we'd like to have a conversation, so there's that. But there's also just the personal gift of getting to be here and now because someone else wants to be here and now with you. And I can't shake it lately when I walk into a hospital room and there's someone in the throes of cancer and its treatments, or when I get online for a grief workshop, or have a conversation like we did earlier this week, Sarah Jane, just you and I, one-on-one. But like the power of facing these things and how much of our aliveness in these moments we get when we just get real and vulnerable and really show up with each other fully, wholly. So I just want to thank everybody for another chance to do that. All I want is more of that. And I want my life to be built of those moments. I need them. So thank you for giving me a chance to have it again. Everybody.
Yeah. Yeah. Big thanks to all. Yeah. And may it be so. May all of our lives be filled with those moments. Definitely feel there's going to be a resonance or a residue from this conversation that allows me to go out into my afternoon fully, really alive.
Yeah.
And I thank you for that. Thank everyone for that. Yeah.
Thank you, everybody.
Thanks.
Thank you, Jake. Thank you, Sarah Jane. Thank you, everybody who shared and commented. Thank you all so much. Thanks for getting on.
Yeah. Be well, all.